Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours. I am in Salem, Massachusetts, home of the Salem kind of witch controversies back in 1692, or hysteria, where the folks from Salem hung and drowned and pressed to death people that they thought were witches. Really interesting thing that I just came across when we were planning what to do after going to SQL Saturday in Boston, and had friends here in Salem, Massachusetts. We're like, oh, we'll drop in and visit them. It had never occurred to me that Salem was such a big deal around Halloween. Huge crowds around Halloween, like 150,000 people a day come to visit Salem. And there's haunted houses, there's ghost stories, tours, all kinds of interesting stuff. Behind me is one of the cemeteries where a bunch of the supposed accused witches were buried. So just did a little tour through there and saw the history of different folks who were accused of witchcraft and how they died. It was really interesting. So, of course, I happen to have my camera with me, and I'm like, well, let's do an Office Hours. So, the top, let me do the now showing recording. Let me grab this real quick. So the top voted question is from SQLDevDBA, who says, hey Brent, have you thought about doing an episode where you put the questions here into Chat GPT? Yes, I've actually done that. I did that probably, I'm going to say 2-3 months ago with GPT 3.5. I haven't done it again with GPT 4, but it's something that at some point I'll come back and do when I think there's serious advancements in it. We saw during the GPT 3.5 episode how hilariously bad some of the answers were, or just inaccurate, really, were some of the answers. But I think some of that comes down to how people phrase questions here in a casual, friendly form, that they would probably phrase them different under Chat GPT. So that I'll give some people some credit there. Next up, Bill Grates, it's pretty good, says, I want to test how long a query takes to run without actually returning results. I vaguely remember some kind of select into null construct. Does that still exist? No, you don't want to select into null. What you want to do is select into a temp table. If you select into a temp table, that'll at least give you a rough idea of how long the query takes to execute. Just be aware that if you're really trying to test queries for repeatable metrics, I don't like time. What I would rather do is either things like logical reads or CPU time, but I wouldn't do time on the clock, especially when it comes down to measuring like millisecond level differences between duration, because really the speed of the client can actually impact that in a negative way. So what I would do is just focus on how much work the server has to do in order to execute it. Next up, ProochingMan says, to eliminate bloat and lower the work for daily maintenance jobs, what do you think about periodically cleaning up auto-created stats by dropping everything that's older than, say, 6 months and allowing them to be recreated again? The problem with it is that even if just one query runs that needs stats against a column, SQL Server will create stats on that column, just one query. So it's really common to see queries run against columns and then get those stats recreated. It doesn't really fix a whole lot there. What I would instead do is step back and say, what's the biggest problem facing the SQL Server, and then focus on that instead, because otherwise no one's going to notice a difference there. Next up, MyTeaGotCold asks, how do I transition from SQL Server to Postgres without having to start from scratch? What are the most important skills that won't be transferable? If you're a production DBA, you're really starting again from scratch. If you're focusing on things like keeping the backups running, check DB, maintenance jobs, managing vacuum in the case of Postgres, you're really starting again from scratch, and there's not really a way to avoid that. If you're a development DBA, the basic ideas behind query tuning and index tuning will still be the same, but for me the biggest barrier is relearning execution plans, because execution plans are rendered differently and you interpret them differently with Postgres than you do with SQL Server. Next up, let's see, sqltzy says, "Hi Brent, a colleague mistakenly ran an insert selecting from a table with 16 billion rows. 4 hours and many log growths later, I noticed it and killed it, and the rollback took ages. For next time, is there a way to kill without a rollback when you don't really care about the data?" Sadly, no, because of course SQL Server is designed for when you do care about the data. If you didn't care about the data, you would put it in MongoDB. But if you do care about the data, if you want to get faster rollbacks, take a look at accelerated database recovery. It's a feature that came out in SQL Server 2019, I think, that lets rollbacks happen instantaneously. The way that it does it is by storing the version store inside the user database. So accelerated database recovery, or MongoDB. So your values may vary. Sylvie asks, in what scenarios do you like to use the SSMS option for discarding results after execution? The only time I like that is when I'm playing games with a colleague and they left their workstation unlocked. Otherwise, I don't bother ever turning that on. Next up, Montrose says, "Hi Brent, can you share one of the craziest things you had to do in order to get across the finish line?" Oh, that's really funny, and I love this question. Okay, so one, it's really funny. Sometimes I have to stop and think about answers. That one I actually know off the top of my head. So I was working with a company that was doing, they had to load millions of rows into a table, and the way that they'd written their application, they were inserting rows one at a time. They were waiting for every single commit to happen after each insert was done. And I said, there's just no way that that's going to scale. It isn't going to work. That's not how databases work. You need to insert batches of rows. And they said, well, it's too late. We have to ship this thing to a client within like a week or two, and we need it to go faster. And so we inserted data into a separate database. It was unrelated to the main regular database, but our loads, our inserts were done onto a database where the database and the log file were on a RAM drive, because we were waiting on write log. Every millisecond counted that it took to insert this stuff to disk. So we started writing just directly to a RAM drive, and we turned on delayed durability to make it go even faster. And that was the only way that we could get it across the finish line. Now, if a load failed, if a round of inserts failed, they had to restart them from scratch, but they were willing to do that in this specialized case. But it was building a database that wouldn't even survive a reboot. That was always funny to me. Next up, AllHailOurMachineOverlords says, did you get to see the Northern Lights while you were in Iceland this most recent trip? And are they amazing as people say? I wasn't able to see them in this most recent trip in September because I had relatively long days and short nights, and the cloud cover was really thick. The time to see Northern Lights is if you go to Iceland in, say, December through like February is really your best bets. And ideally you go as far north as you can to get clear skies and less clouds. So I hadn't seen them on this most recent trip. I saw them when I lived in Iceland for 9 months, and they're way better than you could ever believe on YouTube. You could watch movies on IMAX. It's still not as spectacular as it is in real life. In real life, it is taking up the entire sky, or like one end of the sky to the other as you watch these trails happen. And depending on the intensity of the Northern Lights and their speed, there's really nothing that does them justice. as opposed to just being able to look around and the entire sky and seeing this stuff happen everywhere. It's unbelievable. It's really spectacular. Next up, Calvin asks, I have a non-clustered index with high writes and low reads for a busy table, and we're considering dropping it. We'd like to know which apps are using this index before we drop it. Is there a way to search which apps are using the index? Apps? No, because SQL Server doesn't track which applications run queries, but I can probably get you close. If you search the execution plans DMV, and SP Blitzcache has a function for this. If you look at SP Blitzcache's parameters, there's a parameter called slowly search plans for. If you search for the name of the index inside the plan cache, you're going to get hits. That'll show you which queries are using the index, although it just doesn't show you exactly which applications are running those queries. So that probably gets you close enough. The slowly search plans for parameter in SP Blitz index is not terribly reliable, and I talk about that a little in the documentation, but that should get you a start. Next up, Stupid DBA says, I'm having an ascending key problem in a table. I've attempted to update statistics, but no matter what I do, SQL Server always estimates one row is going to be returned. This makes me feel stupid. Please unstupid me. Well, that's the ascending key problem. SQL Server can't figure out that it's an ascending key, so it only estimates one row. You know the name of the problem that you're facing. You've identified it. You're not stupid. You're doing great. Now you want to know how to solve that problem. And what you do is you search for SQL Server ascending key problem. My favorite post out there is by Thomas Kaiser that explains how to fix that. Kaiser is K-E-J-S-E-R. But just be aware that it's hard work. It usually typically involves creating another table on another server, populating it with fake data going through the future, and then scripting out those statistics so that you can apply them into production and turning off auto update statistics. But you're not stupid at all. It's a very unusual, rare, hard problem. So next up, let's see, CaliDBA says, hi Brent, what would be your advice on the quickest way to back up a database that's accessed by users 24/7 and is multi-terabytes? SAN snapshots. SAN snapshots is the simple, easy answer, works beautifully, has been tested all over the world. Just look for application-aware SAN snapshots that tell SQL Server to back up and restore the database as well. It's really common. It's been used for like 20 years. Backs up databases in a matter of 5 seconds or less. It's really slick. soupnazi asks, do you have any horror stories where a shop ran their web app under the SQL SA account? Yeah, I mean plenty, but it's not going to be a surprise to you. It's kind of hard to make it into a horror. It's kind of like saying, if you run with scissors, what's the worst horror story? Well, you trip and you stab yourself with the scissors. If you run your app under the SA account, someone's going to get access to that SA account. They're going to drop your databases. They're going to put ransomware on your SQL servers. They're going to delete your backups. It's not rocket surgery. It's just these are bad things that happen, and they happen every week all over the world. It's sad that it happens. As a consultant, there's really not anything I can do with it either, because when someone calls to me and says, hey, our SQL server's been wiped, we don't have any backups, whatever, I'm usually booked about 2 to 3 weeks in advance, and so I can't take emergency gigs for stuff where like the whole entire database has been vaporized. So I gotta go, well, your best luck's gonna be to call Microsoft, because if there's anybody good at SQL Server, they are not sitting around bored. So people hate to hear that advice, but it is what it is. My friend asks, hi Brent, have you had any experience with third-party backup tools? Yes, I totally have. If you had to choose a third-party backup tool for very large databases, VLDBs are generally considered a terabyte and above, what would you go for? Again, SAN snapshots. I say that a lot like it's a broken record. By the time you cross 1 terabyte, you need to be looking at SAN snapshots. It's less about making the backup faster for me. It's more about making the restore go faster. Because usually when you have a multi-terabyte database, people are frantic about how quickly it can be restored. And if you tell them 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, they're just not, they don't accept it. They want it faster than that. And SAN snapshot backups can do sub 60-second restores of a database of any size. So it makes so much more sense. And let's see, we'll do one more. Gonzo asks, oh boy. Gonzo asks, why did SQLBits change their speaker reimbursement model? And will this have an effect on speaker turnout? In terms of why they did it, I have no inside information, but if someone cuts your pay, generally the idea is, the reason for that is they want to keep more of the money themselves. It's not rocket surgery. When they cut your pay, they want your money. And it's fair to want money. I like money. I don't have any problem with money. I feel guilty I didn't plan to do this stream and wearing Balenciaga shoes, Gucci pajamas, and a Versace jacket. That I felt really bad when I started recording this, but I'm like, all right, it is what it is. So there's nothing wrong with wanting more money. Will it affect speaker turnout? No. However many sessions SQLBits wants to put on, they will have more than enough speakers for those sessions. They're going to be different speakers because like most of the American speakers have bailed at this point because it's just not paying enough for us to even break even, let alone make money. The American speakers that I know who are still attending are like, hey, I'm just getting started, or I'm trying to improve my reputation. I don't mind losing money to speak at a prestigious conference like SQLBits. And I know because I've done that myself through my career. I have, when I was working my way up, trying to improve my reputation in the community, I absolutely lost money speaking at events. I just spoke at SQL Saturday Boston and broke even probably, but all things considered. But it'll absolutely affect the kinds of speakers who go. Do I think that's a problem for attendees? I don't know. Because there are a lot of good speakers in the community who you can learn a lot from. Sometimes people will say to me, what conference should I attend? The conference you can get to. Whatever conference you can go to, you should attend. It will change your life. It'll help you build networking, whatever. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter exactly who the speakers are. You're going to have a good time. You're going to learn things. So yeah, I can see why they did it. It makes sense to me. All right, so I'm going to stop there. That is the end of the sessions or the questions that I'm going to answer. Well, I probably even should have told you this at the beginning. I think we started drinking at, I don't have my watch on, it's 3 in the afternoon. We started drinking today at like 11:30. I'm here with some friends of ours who also like to party a lot. And we started drinking at like 11:30 at a dive bar that does amazing drinks and really good seafood. So we have both been making bad decisions since relatively early today. So some of my answers may not be the best quality. However, I am now caffeinated. This is just caffeine in here. It's a honeybee cortado. It's honey and espresso and whole milk. It's actually really good. And a little something for spice for a bite, which is kind of neat. And then right now, as we speak, Eve and Jess and Eric are at a bar getting espresso martinis for the next round. So now I have to go track them down and see what's going on. And I think we're going to wander around to a taxidermy shop in Salem. Supposedly there's I say supposedly, Jess has been there, a really good taxidermy shop here. And I am going to a friend's of ours birthday party and wedding anniversary party here shortly. I'm thinking I'm going to see if I can track down some really hilariously bad taxidermy to give as a gift. Careful if you invite me to parties. I tend to either get the worst gift or give the worst gifts or the best gifts. One of the two, or sometimes both, I suppose, depending on what you're after. So thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.